This is episode 701 of the Rio Grande Foundation's Tipping Point, New Mexico. I'm Paul Gessing.
And I'm Wally Drangmeister.
I'm president of the Rio Grande Foundation, New Mexico's free market think tank. You can find out more about the foundation at riograndefoundation.org. Well, Wally, I hope you had a blessed and relaxing Easter holiday. And
Yes, I did. And over that weekend, enjoyed the snow. Only in New Mexico does it snow more in April than it does in January, February, March. But that was nice as well.
yeah, we had a 2 weeks, well, 3 weeks ago, I guess now at this point, on a Saturday, my daughter played soccer in about 46 and overcast. And we thought, well, that's going to be the last cold game. Then it was 84 the next week. And then we're at 36 degrees and snowy and quite miserable out there in the soccer pitch where she plays. So it was quite the much needed moisture. We'll certainly take that and hope for some more on the way. But yes, a very unique Saturday preceding the Easter holiday with regard to the temperatures and the precipitation. So
Yep. If you don't like the weather, it will soon change this time of year.
exactly. Well, we talked briefly, I believe, about the recent launch of Blue Origin. That's the space company owned by Jeff Bezos, with Katy Perry and others flying off into near space. But I want to dive into that a little bit more. Unlike many commentators, I am not going to disparage the reputation of the ladies involved.
And debate whether they're astronauts or not. Oh my! The internet has gone wild discussing that.
Yes, a lot of back and forth over that. I am simply going to point out that Jeff Bezos is obviously launching and successfully launching space flights into the same general altitude level as Virgin Galactic had been doing from New Mexico at the taxpayer financed Spaceport America. Uh, that is notable because a going technology is certainly better than one that's in the kind of the going back to the drawing board stages, we'll call it, because the technology obviously worked well enough. Certainly had some flaws and foibles, but they were able to work through those and were launching, but they were not making any money, and that's why they're redeveloping their entire spacecraft for Virgin Galactic. What is interesting, and it took me reading several articles about the recent Blue Origin flight, is that it took 11 minutes to get all the way up to 62 miles above sea level at the Kármán, Karman line, which is deemed to be the boundary between Earth's atmosphere and space. It takes Virgin Galactic 2.5 hours to achieve the same altitude. That is noteworthy, as is the fact that, as of my research yesterday, SPCE, or Virgin Galactic's stock, has dropped yet another 58% in the year 2025. So, not a particularly great sign. And of course, now that you have two different companies seemingly competing in what I would call the exact same space, and clearly Bezos's company, Blue Origin, has the superior technology, not just because they have the technology, but also because they can do the same flight in a tiny fraction of the amount of time.
Yes, and I agree with you. Just one thing have to get off of my chest. Notwithstanding the shape of the rocket, which the Austin Powers franchise would be proud to have, yeah, it seems like a better technology, and we are going to see. One of the things I always said about this sort of space flight, whether it's the Virgin Galactic, which is basically an airplane. And the reason it takes hours is you just can't fly an airplane straight up. You have
Right.
to, if any of you have ever done skydiving, and I have not, but I have witnessed my daughter, the same thing. You just have to kind of zigzag your way up to get to altitude. So, yes, is it going to work? It works. Now, will it work as a business and how safe it will be? Because, knock on wood, you don't get very many chances if your airframe, your spacecraft, your rocket fails and people die and pass away. That's going to be really bad for business, and that looks like that's the biggest risk right now with the Bezos rocket, whereas with the Virgin Galactic is heck, will that thing ever get off the ground before they run out of money? And if so, is it going to be as cool as being in really a space capsule? Somebody like myself grew up in the Apollo era. It's like, whoa, that has a lot of space-like characteristics. Just blasting off and flying straight up. That I think the trip up would be much more enjoyable, albeit short, on the Bezos rocket.
Yeah, and just to be clear, the Virgin Galactic model involves two spacecraft. One is much more like a plane, the mothership, and then the other is a rocket, but also it is a rocket that is dropped from the mothership that sets it on a pattern that is much more, I guess you'd call it parallel with the surface of the Earth, not perpendicular. And there's a variety of reasons for that. Virgin Galactic, their technology is based on relatively old uh, tech at this point when it comes to space, and Burt Rutan and some of those original pioneers of private space. It's safe to say that I think the vertical launch mechanism that Bezos employs is the superior one. And it is worth noting that aside from Bezos himself being from New Mexico, born in Albuquerque originally, his wife, Lauren Sanchez, who was on the flight, is also a native New Mexican. So uh, they flew out of West Texas, though. No surprise there. Of course, Texas does have a little more coast. I'm not familiar enough with where Blue Origin does its launching, that whether they're launching from anywhere that's got access to a coast or whatever. But if it's West Texas, that
It
would
looked
strike
like
me
a
as,
lot of dirt when they landed. Just
yeah, yeah. It's that was one of the things that I think we were kind of told or implied, is that this New Mexico spaceport had to be in an area where you had that takeoff window, thanks to white sands and the airspace available. I don't know what they're able to do in Texas and how they're able to get those launches done without any of those issues relating to airspace, but clearly they're able to make it work. And uh, I believe SpaceX is also Elon Musk's company from doing launches out of that broad region, but I think maybe closer to the Gulf Coast part of Texas. So regardless, it's competition for Spaceport America and Virgin Galactic at a time when they are most vulnerable, and we're, of course, like many New Mexicans, wondering and waiting to see if and when Virgin Galactic will get back into space. And I think it's a very uh, iffy proposition at this point. But speaking of iffy propositions, not quite the same as launching into space, but traveling I-40 westbound from Albuquerque to the Arizona state line can be an iffy proposition given the deteriorating conditions of the road. Wally, I was in Gallup last week doing some talks and meeting with a few folks. Two of the best people. I'll put them up against anybody in the state. Two of the best people in the state. Sammy Kyoto uh, runs radio station in Gallup. He said hello, by the way, and got to see him. He has are involved with the Rotary Club out there in Gallup, and then Bill Lee of the Gallup McKinley Chamber. Two great guys, just wonderful people, and was happy to see them and chat with them on that trip to Gallup. But man, I-40, it truly is. It is a, I would say, the most important road in the state of New Mexico. And whether the western side, from Albuquerque to the Arizona line, or the eastern side from Albuquerque to the Texas line is worse or more important or more heavily traveled, it is a very, very, very busy road when it comes to freight, and it is underinvested in. It is something that this state should be making a priority. And if I was talking to Greg Hall about kind of mom and apple pie issues, I would say, being especially from Rio Rancho and having his experiences with the challenge of building infrastructure in Rio Rancho, I would say making I-40 three lanes from the Arizona to the Texas line, at least,
Yeah.
within Albuquerque, it's more, but at least three lanes each way would be a great starting point for a platform for the governor of New Mexico.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, Paul. And as I was looking at this item from the extensive show prep that I do every week for the show, what really this brought to mind was New Mexico has all this money, and we're just failing as a state. But we're failing on what they call in football the blocking and tackling, the fundamentals. We have a lot of money that could be used for infrastructure. In fact, we have $5 billion that's allocated for infrastructure that isn't being spent because of various reasons. But we're unable to do that. And then the other issue is that would this who would this serve? Who is this road going to serve? A bunch of out-of-state truckers driving their trucks through the state to New Mexico? Absolutely, it would help them. But here's the thing, we have some manufacturing. We manufacture mattresses and semiconductors and various things that go in and out on chips. And if we had better roads, I think that would just be one other thing in the positive category towards building and growing businesses, particularly involving materials in the state of New Mexico. But what do? We just kind of ignore it. We pretend it's not there. And Paul, they always used to say when I was a kid, you drive from state to state, and when you'd hit the state border, one state's roads were either a lot better or a lot worse. And you say, well, this is either a rich state or a poor state based on how the roads are. Uh, you would think that the state government of New Mexico was destitute financially just by the state of our major roads and even some of the lesser roads. I know I've driven kind of the back way through Arizona, and man, that road is beyond dangerous. And yet, here we go, billions of dollars just sitting there in Santa Fe. Why? Where's the will? Where's the focus on something that basic?
Yeah, and obviously, we at the Rio Grande Foundation generally don't advocate for more government spending. That's not our general approach, but we do have massive oil and gas revenues. And even if the legislature and the governor, as they seem to be, are a bit cautious about mm, sometimes major new spending programs, or on the flip side, any significant tax reform or reduction, because they have this mindset that oil and gas is going to go away in the very near future.
Well, maybe because they try to kill it sometimes, but
Right. But the idea of a big game changing infrastructure project that they can get that going and really improve not just the view of New Mexico from people who travel throughout this state, the safety of those people, you would think that would be a priority, and the safety not just of having the additional lane, but of course the conditions of the road itself, which are not good as well. So, uh, my 3 point view, my platform is expand it all to three lanes from Arizona to Texas, then shore up, repave, and restore as much of it as possible. Also, improve the on and off ramps, which are dated, especially those in Gallup, which need to be re-engineered quite significantly. I don't know why the ramps and some of these features of the road were not created, initially as they should be. That's between Eisenhower and his roads and the developers and the people who put all this stuff together. But that's obviously a critical feature of the roads is to just have them work as intended. And there are a lot of specific ways in which the interstate highway system was required as initially, created to kind of adhere to certain standards. You don't see stoplights on the interstate. You have a certain amount of shoulder space. You tend to have very strict guidelines for the way those roads were created, and it's one of the, as I said before, but I'll say it again. I believe the interstate highway system is the single greatest federal program, at least at the domestic level, that we've seen in this nation. So it's worth
Greatest meaning
preserving.
successful as
Successful.
opposed to large and disastrous. So,
Yes.
hey, Paul, and if we didn't need one more reason, I believe 2026 is the 100th anniversary of Route 66. A lot of tourism events are actually kicking off this year, and we'll see a lot of visitors. And at some point, just another opportunity for New Mexico to put its best foot forward with regard to tourists might be to fix the road.
Yeah, if you've ever done the drive along Route 66, that is an international destination first and foremost because of the cultural relevance and the history associated with Route 66. But there's a lot of places out in the out in the boonies, so to speak, where the I-40 is Route 66. There's no like Central Avenue goes parallel to it.
Well, and you know what? It used to go the back way to Santa Fe,
True.
and you know what I mean? So
Yeah.
there's lots of Route 66s
Yes.
in the area, but the key is if you're on the tour, you'll find yourself on Interstate 40 in New Mexico
Yes.
for a lot of your tour, and that's how you get here.
And maybe while they're refurbishing I-40, they can take a crack at Central running through Albuquerque. Hopefully, the next mayor, probably not this mayor because he's failed for 8 years to do anything. It's deteriorated so dramatically. But the next mayor, in preparation for the centennial of Route 66, perhaps can try to clean that thing up a little bit. If Gavin Newsom can clean up San Francisco for the chairman of the Chinese Communist Party, one might hope that the mayor of Albuquerque could do something similar for folks celebrating the 100th anniversary of Route 66. But we will see. That depends on what happens in November. And we're going to talk about the city of Albuquerque mayoral race a little bit later on. But this is a Albuquerque-centric episode for a variety of reasons. One of those was that the Albuquerque Public Schools Board has set up an outline for their budget for next year. They're already in that planning process for 25-26, that school year, and the Albuquerque Journal reported on it. And they said that APS is on the verge of adopting a $2.3 billion budget for next school year, and the district estimates fewer than 65,000 students. Now, we, in our analysis here, our crazy mathematical technique that we use called long division, we divided the $2.3 billion by $65,000 and came up with a mind-blowing, whopping $35,384 spent at APS per pupil that will be expected to spend during the next school year. And that's, of course, assuming, and the district already saying they expect fewer than 65,000 students, but they didn't provide a specific number. 65,000 is kind of at the high end, and that means that if you take that number lower, we're going to get higher than $35,384 per pupil, which is a lot of money.
Yeah, and for that spending, what are we getting? Are we getting world class education? Are we even getting the best in New Mexico? Not even close on either one of those fronts. It is amazing, Paul. And man, this theme just keeps coming up time and time again. Money is not the primary agent to solve the problems facing New Mexico. It's policy. It's what people do. It's what they're incentivized to do. And Albuquerque Public Schools, they have a whole lot of money. That it is amazing the spending that has gone on. And once it gets up to 50, 60, $70,000, what are we going to do then? And if we keep driving population out of the greater Albuquerque metro area because of crime and lack of opportunities, because of our poor business climate, crime, lack of health care, et cetera. What is that going to mean? You know, I don't want to say this because I don't want it to happen, but man, we seem like we're teetering on the precipice of a lot of things working together against greater Albuquerque area from an economics point of view. And this is just one of them.
Yeah, and to that end, John Trever, the cartoonist over at the Albuquerque Journal, has yet another insightful column on this issue. It shows two individuals on a teeter totter. That's a seesaw for those who grew up in a different part of the country. I don't know. He calls it a teeter totter. I call it a teeter totter myself. Uh, and the small child on the with the enrollment sign on them is coming down, whereas a seemingly grown adult is with a budget sign on them is hopping upwards, and that's a very true sign and a true illustration of what is happening. Uh, the state is flush with cash and pouring more money every single year into education, including right here at APS. But the enrollment and the people choosing to send their students to APS is dropping for a variety of reasons, as well as we saw recently, the number of enrolled students who are actually attending classes is way down as well. And I don't blame APS for everything. They are hamstrung by state level policies. We don't have the ability to do local school choice, for example. They have restrictions on where the funds can go, et cetera. So it's not all APS or their board. This is just them having this money available and unfortunately the results not being what they want. Now, one aspect of the story from the Albuquerque Journal is quite humorous though, where you're spending 35,000 plus dollars and yet they're claiming, "Oh, we have a budget deficit of 4.7 million dollars." Um, guys, I think you have more than enough money at the largest school district in the state. Uh, and, Santa Fe's, I remember last time we checked, not next year's budget, probably this year's budget is somewhere just north of $30,000. Again, we're not doing any very innovative statistical techniques. We are simply taking the budget and dividing it by the number of students. I don't know how the Census Bureau and other so called analysts get their data, but I do think that a lot of the numbers that we throw around nationally really don't add up when it comes to what is actually being spent. And by the way, my kids go to a Catholic school for elementary school. Tuition there is less than $7,000, and that covers everything. Yes, there's some additional fundraising that goes on, but that is obviously a tiny fraction of what we're talking about for APS.
Yeah, so that's $7,000 to throw, I guess, probably 80, 90% of the total cost, right? So it's as opposed to 35 grand. That is a lot of money. And it's crazy, Paul. Look at a classroom, just do the math pretty quickly. A 20 student classroom, that's $700,000 worth of spending.
Yeah.
Where we know the teacher doesn't make 700,000. We know there is where is that money going? It's one of those things that we understand things cost money. There is overhead to be had, but just starting off from that point of view, it's there is a lot of inefficiency in that system somewhere.
Yeah, I mean, for 35,000 plus dollars, I think the academy is creeping up around the
Yeah.
$30,000 number. But yeah, you can afford a really sweet education for that amount. And again, back, I don't know if it was the end of 2024 or beginning of this year, but there was a big discussion at APS over closing a few schools. That is another aspect of this. We're not necessarily saying that all of this money is being spent in the classroom. A lot of this is being spent on buildings and infrastructure and keeping facilities open and functional that have a tiny fraction of the number of students they once did. And I don't know, I have no way to say that the quality of the education would improve if they were able to reallocate that
Mhm.
money from buildings and infrastructure and maintenance to paying teachers more, because we have these strictures in place that disallow the payment of better teachers at a higher rate. I just there's no question that we're spending plenty of money, but it's not working well, and that's why we ultimately support empowering parents and families with these dollars to get the education system and the education for their children that makes the most sense. The system as it stands now is not functioning well. So now moving away from APS to the city of Albuquerque. And did you know, Wally, as a resident of the city of Albuquerque, that there is a significant tax increase being uh, considered through Albuquerque City Council?
And let me guess which one. Income tax? No.
No.
Property tax? No. Gross receipts tax?
Yes,
Oh my
3/8 of a
God.
cent increase in the city's GRT. I'm not sure. I don't think the city could increase the income tax if it
No,
wished
no,
to.
I'm just, it was one of those.
Just saying,
My
but
favorite tax.
yes,
So,
the current rate is 7.625. If adopted, the rate would shoot up to 8%. It was recently passed out of the council's Finance and Government Operations Committee, with some interesting people voting for and against, or excused. Again, that's a committee within the council, so not the entire committee. But Dan Champagne, yes. Dan Lewis against. Brooke Bassan for. Clarissa Pena excused. Joaquin Baca, who sponsored the bill, for. Luis Sanchez excused. Now, this bill, to the sponsors' credit, does require a vote. That is not a requirement of the city's uh, of their the charter. There's no requirement. I believe Keller passed a or signed a tax increase that was passed by council several years ago, and did so without having a vote of the people. But this would be required in this particular case, and of course, Luis Sanchez, who is a current member of City Council, will eventually get to weigh in on this issue, and see where he decides to go, which I think will have a tremendous impact on his, standing in the race for mayor. But I want to make sure that people are aware of this particular tax increase, and you can weigh in with your city councilor. It could come up, I don't think this Monday, but the following Monday, uh, at the full council. So it is time to engage with those folks if you feel that you are taxed enough already.
and I feel that way, Paul. Do you know what my number one business expense is?
The gross receipts tax.
Gross receipts tax. It's already up there in the eight, nine, $10,000 range, and this would add another three, four, five, $600 depending on how my year's going. And you know what? I love paying taxes. It's my civic duty. But man, this is the other theme is Albuquerque has I think money hurts Albuquerque because it distracts them from doing what they need to do. And if they're going to raise more money, are they going to hire more police? No. Are they going to make the streets safer? No. They're going to, God knows what they're going to do.
And under Keller's 8 years in office, just like the state, the budget of the city of Albuquerque has exploded. His latest budget is $1.5 billion, and uh, that is almost double where it was when he took office. So it's a very significant rate of growth there at the city of Albuquerque, even faster than the state. And that's saying something. Now, an update in terms of the Albuquerque mayor's race. You have 9 total candidates. I'm just going to give a few thoughts on them. Alpana Adair. I don't think she's got much of a chance, unfortunately. Mei-Ling Armijo, former director of economic development for Bernalillo County and deputy county manager for Sandoval County. I think that is an interesting candidate. Brian Faher, I don't think he has much of a chance. He wants to create a subway system for the city of Albuquerque, which uh,
As we
maybe,
say, mighty bold plan.
yeah, that's an interesting idea. Tim Keller, of course, the incumbent, running for a third term. Patrick Seiss unsuccessfully ran for the New Mexico House as a Republican and mayor in 2021. I don't think he has a great shot. Luis Sanchez, city councilor for my area on the west side. He is probably, in my estimation, the front runner of the non-Mayor Keller candidates, but there's some obvious questions relating to you know this whole race and the way it's going to shake out at this point. Now, a new candidate that jumped into the race, Alexander Ubayez. I may be pronouncing his name incorrectly, but he was recently the U.S. Attorney for the District of New Mexico, but essentially resigned when Trump took office. He was Biden's guy. Now, this is the one I am most interested in chatting with you about because there was a guy named Damon Martinez
Yes.
who was also a U.S. attorney, I believe, under Obama,
Yes.
and ran for Congress in a primary on the Democratic side, ran for something else, and I'm not sure that U.S. attorney is a great stepping stone, at least in New Mexico, to political office. But on the other hand, if there's people who are more on the left, who are potential Keller voters, but who may not particularly care for the job Keller's doing, this guy could be an interesting person in this race.
Yes, and I tend to agree with you generically about these U.S. attorneys being political candidates. If my choices were to watch paint dry or to listen to one of them, I have to really think long and hard, typically before I figure out which it is. Now, having said that, I have not heard him. This could be way different, but also, I would have I would say starting out, his name, his position recognition, once you say what that is, people are like, oh, I know what that is. His name recognition, I would be surprised if it's less than, if it's more than a 0.5%, if anyone even could place him. So I think he's starting off, as the outsider, where other candidates are definitely, more likely to have name recognition. And then in the case of Luis Sanchez, because there's a couple of them, one's conservative, one's liberal. Heck, he may just get some votes because people think they're thinking they're voting for the Luis Sanchez that they know. So
Right.
Ubales doesn't have that as popular Spanish surname, so I don't think that's likely to happen in his case. So
Yeah, that is a different name. And I'll say more specifically when it comes to the policy. U.S. attorneys are kind of the Captain America types. That's their persona. They're the guys who are enforcing the law. They are tossing the bad guys in jail, and they are trying to move a community, the district that they are working in a better direction when it comes to crime and fighting crime and that kind of thing.
Or they're the biggest wusses in law enforcement because they will only take cases that are slam dunks that have
Fair
been
enough.
put together over 5 or 10
I was
years.
talking persona,
Well, no, I
not
mean,
reality.
so exactly, they're Captain America when, really maybe they are not.
But I
So,
don't think that goes very far with the Democratic Party here in New Mexico. I think the pro crime, pro criminal contingent in the Democratic Party
yeah,
is much bigger than people give it credit for. Whether it's the soft on crime, whether it's pro criminal, whether it's whatever. I mean, look at, not to change the subject,
yeah.
but you've got this judge down in Las Cruces who's harboring a Tren de Aragua member and allowing them access to firearms. It's just mind blowing. I think there are a lot more of those kinds of types, especially on the Democratic side. I'm not saying no Republicans, but it seems hard to find Republicans who are going to consort with Tren de Aragua members. Anyway,
Well,
I
and just one real
yeah,
quick thing. What's the last case that you say, man, the U.S. attorney in New Mexico pulled off this huge case? You know what? There aren't very many of those. I think I go back to Manny Aragon is the one that sticks out. Now, there are a lot of cases pending, including former legislator Stapleton. But has anything happened in that? Not. It's been
no,
years.
yeah. Well, okay, so I think the reason I bring him specifically up, A, he's new, he's got a pedigree, but B, he could be a difference maker and pulling Keller down from the 50% threshold. Will he be the guy to challenge him? I don't know, but
Yeah.
he could be someone that the more progressive Democratic voters look to. Eddie Varela, of course, who came on this show, I consider him probably the most conservative candidate, but I think Luis Sanchez and Darren White are within shouting distance of him. It'll be interesting to see if Eddie can uh, parlay his hard work into name ID and ultimately election. And of course, Darren White, former sheriff of Bernalillo County, who I very much would like to have on this show to talk about his candidacy as well. So,
Yeah,
Darren,
and
if you're
it's
listening, please let me know. I'd love to have you on.
come on down, Darren. And the thing with Darren is it's going to be interesting to see, do people remember him, and if so, how? In terms of starting out with name recognition and policy. Obviously was Bernalillo County Sheriff, had some definite ups and downs during that, and what do people think about that? And so. You didn't ask me, Paul, but I will tell you right now. I do think, as I look at these candidates, I think Luis Sanchez right now to me looks like the front runner if there is going to be somebody to bring a strong opposition to the Keller campaign. But as they say, it's early and there's a lot of campaigning to be done potentially between now and the election.
Yeah, and Louis as well. I'd love to have him on as well. I mean, any of the mainstream candidates I'd be interested in talking to. If Mr. Ubayez or one of his staffers wants to talk, and of course, Mayor Keller, if you would like to sit down, I would roll out the red carpet and would be glad to have him on as well. Uh, Now, final story, just a few minutes left. This goes into the category of yet another disappointment, Wally. Sunday's Albuquerque Journal, uh, article head of the Business Outlook section. New Mexico officials, state needs diversified revenues. Now, that is the print edition, uh, and that headline stinks, to say the least. But the online version has a different headline, also, which pretty much stinks, although it's maybe a little bit better. State officials say generation of renewables not going to replace oil revenue.
Oh my God, Paul, say that again. Say that again. I
Yeah.
don't think I heard you
State
right.
officials say generation of renewables is not enough to replace oil revenue. I know this is shocking.
Oh, you know what? There was a former state land commissioner who made a statement many years ago that at some point renewables were going to surpass oil and gas. And I did the calculations based on the trend. It was something like 57,000 years before that would happen. And so I think it will happen. But I don't think it will happen at a geological timeline, not any years or epochs or whatever. It just isn't going to happen.
When the sun hits the planet Earth, then we will have a uptick in solar, and we will also now surpass oil and gas. Well,
And so you know what? I totally agree with it. But here's the thing: who cares whether it's like this is not an issue related to oil and gas. Diversifying our economy is about having policies in place that encourage business to be here. And until we do that, I just say, big O yawn. And this event was sponsored by Axios.
Axios, yes.
And Axios, they are the why this is important. Why this is important, Axios, is because we aren't going to do anything at New Mexico at our current trajectory to do anything about this. So this is basically a waste of electrons and ink at this point. These sorts of statements, because where are tax cuts? Where's our regulatory reform? Where is good education? Where is crime initiatives? Those are the things that help diversify an economy, and we don't have any of those working right now.
Yeah, the article is largely a vehicle for Lane Commissioner Stephanie Garcia Richard, who has recently stated that she'll be running for lieutenant governor, and all that's well and good.
The most important position in politics.
Yes, and it talks about Garcia Richard's attempts to bring more money into the state from so-called renewables, and how she's doing in that regard. And none of it really matters. I mean, there's a nice quote from Missy Courier from the New Mexico Oil and Gas Association, who was also on a panel, and said that uh, while we want to continue producing the high levels, we have got to find a way to diversify. Now, that is probably the single most important quote, although it would have been nice for her to say, diversify our economy, not diversify the revenues. Diversifying government revenues is like adding another leech to a patient that's already got 5 or 6 leeches sucking blood out of them. We don't need more government sources of revenue. We need more diversification in our economy. And sadly, in the Albuquerque Journal, and the reporter who wrote this story, and a headline writer, nobody seems to be, with the possible exception of Missy Courier, to understand that the critical fact, the critical issue is diversifying New Mexico's economy, then worrying about the tax revenue picture, not diversifying the revenue picture, which I don't know how the heck you're going to do that when oil and gas brings in so much money into the state and you haven't done anything to diversify our economy. It's just, one of those Easter potatoes that they were using. It's like you can squeeze that potato and you may get a little water out of it, but that is what we're trying to do when it comes to the rest of the economy. The oil and gas in this state is the dominant feature of our economy. It's the dominant revenue generator, but it's not enough to build a robust, diversified economy on it. Who knows what oil and prices are going to do in the next, month or year? But if they go down, we're going to be saying, "Oh, it'd be nice to be diversified."
Well, yeah, and now being clear, you're right. It's not enough. How the oil and gas industry does very little for diversifying New Mexico. Having said that, the money that flows off of that could be used in those efforts, but they are not. And here's the thing: if you talk about diversifying New Mexico's economy, uh, here's a rule: if I were the chair, you can't mention oil and gas because that has nothing to do with it. It's all the other policies that are in place, and how are we going to look at those? Because you know, Paul, the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago, but the second best time to plant it is right now. And New Mexico, I have a feeling the time we will try to plant those trees will be kind of like when Detroit lost the auto industry, when the oil and gas if for some reason just were to go away 20, 50, 1,000 years from now, then we might look at it, because there has been no sign of any movement from a policy point of view. They won't even talk about it. There were things that were proposed this last legislative session that would have potentially helped, but they don't even really get much of a hearing.
All right. Well, we will have to leave it there. Thanks for listening to this week's episode. Find all episodes at tippingpointsnm.com or at the Rio Grande Foundation's YouTube channel. Subscribe to the show at Apple, Stitcher, or tell Google Home to play Tipping Point New Mexico. Thanks to Path 3 Marketing for producing this show.